When my daughter Jessica looked me straight in the eye and said, "Find another place to die, you're worthless now," I knew my life had just taken the most brutal turn imaginable. But what she didn't know was that her father had been playing chess while she was playing checkers. And in 3 days, I would go from a homeless widow to the woman holding all the power. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button, and tell me in the comments where you're from. Because what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core. This story has more plot twists than a Hollywood thriller, and every single word is true. 3 months ago, I was Eleanor Mitchell, devoted wife for 41 years, mother to one completely ungrateful daughter. When my husband Charles died suddenly from a stroke at 73, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me had already happened. I was so wrong. Charles had been my entire world. We'd built everything together. Our beautiful home on Maple Ridge, his successful architecture firm, what I thought was a solid foundation for our family's future. When the paramedics wheeled him out of our kitchen that Tuesday morning, I felt like they were taking half of my soul with them. Jessica swooped in during those first dark weeks, like a hawk circling wounded prey. At 38, she was everything Charles had raised her to be, polished, ambitious, and absolutely ruthless when it came to getting what she wanted. She'd married Derek, a hedge fund manager who wore $1,000 suits and talked about money like it was a religion. "Mom, we need to talk about your situation," she said one evening, settling into Charles's favorite armchair like she already owned it. Her voice had that fake sweetness she'd perfected since childhood. The tone she used when she wanted something but didn't want to seem like the bad guy. I was still wearing Charles's old sweater, still sleeping on the couch because I couldn't bear to go into our bedroom. "What situation, honey?" Jessica exchanged a look with Derek, who was scrolling through his phone like this conversation was beneath his attention. "This house, Mom. It's way too big for you now. The upkeep, the property taxes, all those memories. It's not healthy for a woman your age to be rattling around in here alone." A woman my age. I was 65, not 90. But in Jessica's world, apparently, I'd already crossed some invisible line into uselessness. "I'm managing just fine," I told her, though we both knew that was only partially true. Charles had handled all the finances, all the business decisions. I'd spent 4 decades being the supportive wife, the perfect hostess, the woman behind the successful man. Now I felt lost in my own life. "Are you, though?" Derek looked up from his phone for the first time. "Because the bills are piling up, the yard looks like a jungle, and honestly, Eleanor, you seem pretty overwhelmed." The way he said my name, like he was talking to a confused child, made something cold settle in my chest. But I pushed the feeling aside. These were my family. They were trying to help. Over the next few weeks, Jessica's visits became more frequent and more pointed. She'd arrive with glossy brochures for retirement communities, printouts of small condos for sale, articles about seniors who'd been so much happier after downsizing. "Look at this place, Mom." She'd spread the materials across my kitchen table like a real estate agent closing a deal. "Sunny Acres has a wonderful community center, organized activities, people your own age. No more worrying about maintenance or property taxes, or any of that stressful stuff. Sunny Acres." The name alone made me feel like I was being put out to pasture. "Jessica, this is my home. Your father and I built this life together. I'm not ready to just abandon it." Her patience was starting to wear thin. I could see it in the tight line of her mouth, the way she checked her watch like I was making her late for something important. "Mom, you're not abandoning anything. You're being practical. This house is worth almost $2 million. That money could secure your entire retirement." $2 million. The number should have impressed me, but all I could think about was 41 years of memories being reduced to a real estate listing. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October. Jessica arrived unannounced with Derek and 2 large suitcases. Not visiting suitcases, moving suitcases. "Mom, we've made a decision," Jessica announced, walking into my foyer like she owned the place. Derek was already carrying bags upstairs like he knew exactly where he was going. My blood turned to ice water. "What kind of decision?" "Derek got promoted to senior partner. We need to relocate closer to the city immediately. This house is perfect for us. Close to Derek's new office, great schools for the kids, established neighborhood." I stared at her, my brain struggling to process what I was hearing. Move in? Jessica, this is my house. That's when her mask finally slipped completely. The fake concern, the loving daughter act, it all disappeared in an instant, replaced by something cold and calculating that I'd never seen before. Actually, Mom, according to Daddy's will, the house belongs to me now. Along with everything else. The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you talking about? Jessica pulled a folded document from her purse with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment for weeks. Daddy left everything to me. The house, the business, all the investments. Every single asset. My legs nearly gave out. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. That's impossible. Charles would never. He would, and he did. Jessica's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the weather. He knew you'd never be able to handle managing this kind of wealth. You've never worked outside the home, never dealt with investments or business decisions. He was protecting his legacy by putting it in capable hands. I reached for the document with shaking fingers. The legal language was dense and confusing, but Charles's signature was right there at the bottom. Witnessed and notarized. My name appeared exactly once, as his surviving spouse, entitled to reasonable support from the estate. I don't understand, I whispered. Charles always said we'd take care of each other. He promised me I'd never have to worry about money. And you don't have to worry, Jessica said, her voice taking on that fake sweetness again. I'll make sure you're comfortable. There's a lovely assisted living facility across town, Willowbrook Gardens. Very affordable, and they have a waiting list, but I can pull some strings. Assisted living. At 65. Because my own daughter thought I was too incompetent to live independently. Derek came back downstairs carrying a box of Charles's books. My husband's books. Eleanor, this is really the best solution for everyone. You'll have your independence, we'll have the space we need for our growing family, and everyone wins. What growing family? I asked, confused. Jessica's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, and I saw the truth in her eyes. She was pregnant. They'd been planning this takeover for months, probably even before Charles died. They'd needed our house for their expanding family, and Charles's death had simply accelerated their timeline. I'm 10 weeks along, she said, trying to sound casual. We'll need the extra bedrooms, and honestly, Mom, having a baby in the house isn't really compatible with having an elderly person around. Elderly person. That's what I'd become to my own daughter. Jessica, please. I tried one more time. This is my home. Can't we work something out? I could take the guest house, or maybe just stay in the smaller bedroom upstairs. The look she gave me was pure ice. Mom, I'm trying to be kind here, but you need to face reality. You're 65. You have no job, no income, no real skills for the modern world. The most generous thing Daddy could have done was ensure you be taken care of in an appropriate facility. Appropriate facility. Like I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. Find another place to die, she said finally, her voice flat and final. You're worthless now. Those words would haunt me forever. My own daughter, the baby I'd carried for 9 months, the child I'd sacrificed my own career to raise, had just told me I was worthless and should go die somewhere else. I packed my life into 3 suitcases that night. 41 years of marriage, 65 years of existence, reduced to what I could carry in my shaking hands. Jessica watched from the doorway of what had been my bedroom, checking her phone like I was an inconvenience keeping her from something important. There's a decent motel on Route 9, she offered with all the enthusiasm of someone giving directions to the bathroom. The Pineview Inn. Very reasonable rates while you figure out your next steps. Reasonable rates. My daughter was about to inherit $33 million, and she was recommending a budget motel for her homeless mother. Derek loaded my suitcases into his BMW with the same care he'd show for garbage bags. Eleanor, this transition period is always difficult, but you'll adjust. Change can be positive at your age. Change. That's what they were calling the destruction of my entire life. Change. As we drove away from Maple Ridge, I watched my house disappear in the side mirror. The house where I'd hosted Jessica's birthday parties every year until she turned 18. Where I'd nursed Charles through pneumonia. Where we'd planned to grow old together. watching grandchildren play in the same yard where Jessica had once caught fireflies. Now it belonged to the daughter who just thrown me away like yesterday's trash. The Pineview Inn was exactly what you'd expect from a place advertising clean rooms $45 per night on a flickering neon sign. The carpet was brown, whether by design or age was unclear. The bedspread looked like it hadn't been updated since 1987. The bathroom door didn't close properly, and the air conditioning unit sounded like a dying animal. Jessica handed me $200 in cash like she was tipping a hotel maid. This should cover you for a few days while you get your bearings. I'll have Derek's accountant look into setting up some kind of monthly allowance once we sort through Daddy's paperwork. An allowance from my own inheritance. After they left, I sat on the edge of that sagging mattress and tried to understand what had just happened to my life. In the span of 6 hours, I'd gone from grieving widow to homeless senior citizen. The daughter I devoted my life to had discarded me with less ceremony than she'd probably used to fire a housekeeper. But as I sat there in that depressing motel room, something started nagging at me. Something about Charles, about the will, about the timing of Jessica's sudden urgency to help me with my living situation. Charles had been many things: traditional, sometimes stubborn about money, occasionally old-fashioned in his ideas about women and business. But he wasn't cruel. The man who'd surprised me with weekend trips to the coast for our anniversary every year, who'd held my hand through my father's funeral, who'd told me every morning for 41 years that I was beautiful, that man wouldn't have left me with nothing. And the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that the document Jessica had shown me wasn't the whole story. Charles had always been obsessive about organization, about making sure I understood our financial situation. He'd shown me various legal documents over the years, explaining his wishes, walking me through different scenarios. And I was absolutely certain that's not what his will had said. The next morning, I used the motel's spotty Wi-Fi to search for Charles's attorney. Gerald Harrison had handled our legal affairs for over 20 years, our house purchase, business contracts, various estate planning updates. His office was downtown, a 30-minute bus ride that would cost me precious dollars, but I had to know the truth. Gerald Harrison was a dignified man in his 70s with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When his secretary announced that Mrs. Mitchell was here about her husband's estate, his face showed genuine surprise. "Eleanor, my dear. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I called your house repeatedly, but Jessica said you were traveling and would contact me when you were ready." Traveling? That's what my daughter had told him while I was sleeping in a motel. "Mr. Harrison, I need to ask you about Charles's will." His confusion was immediate and obvious. "Of course. I assume Jessica provided you with your copy after the reading." My heart stopped. "What reading? Eleanor, you were supposed to be there. It's required by law that all primary beneficiaries attend the reading. Jessica said you were too distraught, that she'd handle everything and make sure you understood your inheritance." The room started spinning around me. "Mr. Harrison, Jessica told me she inherited everything. She said Charles left me nothing except reasonable support." Gerald Harrison's face went from confusion to alarm so quickly that I actually saw him reach for his phone. "Eleanor, that's absolutely impossible. Your husband's will is very explicit about your inheritance." He pulled out a thick file folder, his movements suddenly urgent. I recognized Charles's precise handwriting on several documents, his signature bold and unmistakable at the bottom. "I, Charles William Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife Eleanor Rose Mitchell the following. Our primary residence at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive, including all furnishings and personal effects." My throat closed up. The house. Charles had left me the house. Gerald continued reading, his voice growing more serious with each line. "Additionally, I leave her 75% of all financial assets, investments and accounts, totaling approximately $25 million. $25 million. 75%. I hadn't inherited nothing. I'd inherited almost everything. To my daughter, Jessica Mitchell Hayes, I leave $8 million, to be distributed according to the terms outlined in Section C of this document." My head was spinning so violently I thought I might pass out. 8 million, not 33. And there was more. "Mr. Harrison," I managed to whisper, What are the terms in Section C? His expression grew even more grave as he flipped to another page. The distribution of Jessica's inheritance is contingent upon her treatment of you following Charles's death. Specifically, she must demonstrate respect, kindness, and appropriate care for your well-being. Respect, kindness, appropriate care. Jessica had shown me the exact opposite of all three. And if she doesn't meet those terms? Gerald looked up from the document, his elderly face flushed with what I realized was anger. Then her entire inheritance reverts to you instead. The silence in that office was deafening. Jessica hadn't just lied to me about the will. She'd triggered the exact clause that would cost her everything. Eleanor, Gerald said carefully. What exactly did Jessica tell you? What documents did she show you? I told him everything. The fake concern, the assisted living brochures, the forged will, the cash handout, the motel recommendation. Every humiliating detail of how my own daughter had thrown me away like garbage. When I finished, Gerald Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. Eleanor, what Jessica has done isn't just morally wrong. It's criminal. She's committed elder abuse, fraud, and possibly forgery. But more than that. He paused, looking directly into my eyes. She's just cost herself $8 million. According to your husband's actual will, you now inherit $33 million plus the house and all personal property. The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. Jessica had been so greedy to claim her inheritance that she'd triggered the exact protection Charles had built into the will to safeguard me from her selfishness. But as I sat there processing this information, one question kept nagging at me. Mr. Harrison, how did Jessica get legal documents convincing enough to fool me? Those papers look completely authentic. His expression darkened. Eleanor, creating convincing legal forgeries requires specific knowledge and connections. Jessica didn't do this alone. The investigation into Jessica's fraud began immediately. Gerald Harrison called the police, the district attorney's office, and a private investigator he'd worked with for years. Within hours, my motel room had become the unofficial headquarters for what Detective Sarah Rodriguez cheerfully called Operation Family Justice. Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Rodriguez said, spreading documents across the motel's small table. Your daughter and son-in-law have been planning this for months. These forged documents are sophisticated, too sophisticated for someone without insider knowledge of legal procedures. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in financial crimes against seniors. The stack of evidence she'd already gathered was impressive and terrifying. We've traced the paper stock, the fonts, even the notary stamps. Everything points to a professional operation. Your son-in-law Derek's investment firm has connections to a document preparation service that's been under investigation for securities fraud. My stomach dropped. Securities fraud? Derek himself has been flagged by the SEC for suspicious trading patterns. We think your daughter may have married into a family with a history of financial crimes. I thought about Derek's expensive suits, his casual attitude toward money, the way he talked about managing my inheritance like it was already his. Had Jessica known about his criminal background? Or had she been another victim of his manipulation? What happens now? I asked. Gerald leaned forward from his chair near the window. Now we file criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. And we execute your husband's actual will, which means you get your house back immediately. My house. I was going home. But first we had to confront Jessica and Derek with the truth. I want to be there when you arrest them, I told Detective Rodriguez. She looked surprised. Mrs. Mitchell, that's unusual. Most victims prefer to avoid the confrontation. Most victims haven't been thrown out of their own homes by their own children. I want to see their faces when they realize what they've done. Gerald smiled for the first time since I'd walked into his office. Eleanor, I think your husband would be very proud of the woman you're becoming. That afternoon we drove to Maple Ridge. My house looked different, somehow smaller, less intimidating than it had seemed when I was leaving in defeat. Jessica's car was in the driveway, along with Derek's BMW and a contractor's truck. Through the front window, I could see Jessica directing two men who were measuring the living room. She was already planning renovations, spending money she thought was hers on changes to a house that had never belonged to her. Detective Rodriguez knocked on the door with the confidence of someone who held all the cards. Jessica opened it wearing yoga pants and a designer top, her hair pulled back in the casual style of someone who thought she was living in luxury. When she saw me standing behind the detective, her face cycled through confusion, annoyance, and what might have been. "Mom, what are you doing here? And who is this?" "Jessica Mitchell Hayes. I'm Detective Rodriguez with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to talk." Jessica's face went white. "About what?" "About the forged will you used to steal your mother's inheritance." The contractors stopped measuring. Derek appeared from the kitchen, took one look at our group, and I saw him immediately reach for his phone. "I wouldn't do that, Mr. Hayes," Detective Rodriguez said calmly. "You're both under arrest." What happened next was like watching a movie where the villains finally get caught. Jessica started crying. Not the pretty tears she'd used to manipulate people since childhood, but ugly, panicked sobs. Derek tried to run, actually tried to push past us toward the back door, but Gerald had anticipated that possibility. 2 more officers were waiting in the backyard. As they handcuffed my daughter, she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Absolute betrayal. As if I had somehow wronged her by discovering her crimes. "Mom, please. Think about what this will do to the kids. Think about our family." "Our family?" "The family she destroyed when she told me to find somewhere else to die. I am thinking about our family, Jessica. I'm thinking about how you threw me away like garbage the moment you thought you could profit from it." Derek was shouting something about lawyers and harassment, but his voice sounded distant and unimportant. All I could focus on was the look in Jessica's eyes. The dawning realization that her perfect plan had not only failed but backfired spectacularly. "You don't understand," she said desperately as they loaded her into the police car. "We needed this money. Derek's business is in trouble. We have debts you don't know about. The pregnancy complications require expensive treatments." Excuses. Even facing criminal charges, she couldn't admit that what she'd done was simply wrong. "Jessica," I said, looking down at her through the car window, "needing money doesn't justify stealing it from your own mother." As the police cars pulled away, I stood in the driveway of my house, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Gerald handed me the keys with a smile. "Welcome home, Eleanor." The contractors were packing up their equipment, looking confused and probably wondering if they'd get paid. I decided to be generous. "Gentlemen, I'm the actual owner of this house. If you'd like to submit a bill for your time today, I'll make sure you're compensated." They looked relieved. Apparently, Derek hadn't paid them in advance. Walking back into my house felt surreal. Jessica had already moved her belongings into the master bedroom, replacing Charles's careful organization with her chaos of expensive clothes and cosmetics. I packed everything into garbage bags and left them on the front porch. She could collect them after she made bail. If she could make bail. That evening, Gerald called with updates that made my head spin. "Eleanor, Derek's financial situation is worse than we thought. He's been running a Ponzi scheme through his investment firm for over 2 years. The FBI is involved now." "A Ponzi scheme?" "He's been using new investor money to pay fake returns to existing clients. Classic fraud pattern." When they searched his office, they found evidence of over $15 million in fraudulent transactions. I sank into my favorite armchair, the one Jessica had been planning to replace. Does this mean Jessica was involved? Unknown at this point. She either knew about his crimes and participated, or she was another victim of his manipulation. Either way, her inheritance is gone. Everything Derek claimed to own is actually stolen money that will be returned to his victims. The irony was breathtaking. Jessica had thrown me away to claim an inheritance that would have made her wealthy. Instead, she'd married a criminal who was about to lose everything. But the story was far from over. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed for the first time in months. Sunlight streamed through windows that actually belonged to me, in a house that was legally and completely mine. For the first time since Charles's death, I felt like I might have a future. Gerald arrived at 9 with a briefcase full of documents and a smile that suggested good news. "Eleanor, I have updates that will interest you." First, Jessica and Derek have been formally charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and forgery. Derek faces additional federal charges related to his investment scheme. What kind of sentences are we talking about? For Jessica, potentially 3 to 5 years if she's convicted on all charges. For Derek, possibly 15 to 20 years when you include the federal charges. 20 years. My son-in-law was looking at spending the prime of his life in prison. But there's more, Gerald continued. The FBI has been investigating Derek's firm for months. When they searched his home office yesterday, they found something interesting. He pulled out a folder thick with photographs and documents. Derek has been keeping detailed records of his criminal activities, including his plans for your inheritance. Gerald spread out copies of handwritten notes, clearly in Derek's precise handwriting. What I read made my blood run cold. Phase 1. Convince Jay that mother is incompetent and dangerous to inheritance security. Phase 2. Create legal documents showing total inheritance to Jay. Phase 3. Move into house immediately, gain control of all assets. Phase 4. Once inheritance is secure, minimize support to mother to preserve maximum capital. I stared at the documents. They planned this before Charles even died. It gets worse. Look at this. Another document, dated just a week after Charles's funeral. Mother becoming suspicious about will contents. Need to accelerate timeline. Jay agrees to take hardline approach. Guilt and fear are most effective tools for controlling elderly targets. Elderly targets. That's what I'd been to them. Gerald, they weren't just stealing my money. They were emotionally abusing me as part of a calculated plan. Which is why the prosecutor is adding psychological abuse charges. Eleanor, what they did to you was methodical and cruel. I thought about those weeks of Jessica's fake concern. Her carefully orchestrated campaign to convince me I was incompetent and burdensome. Every loving gesture had been manipulation. Every expression of worry had been an act. What about the pregnancy? I asked. Is Jessica really pregnant? Gerald's expression grew uncomfortable. According to her medical records, yes. About 12 weeks along. So that part had been real. Jessica was carrying my grandchild while planning to throw me away like garbage. The baby would be born while its mother was potentially in prison for elder abuse. Gerald, what happens to the child if Jessica goes to prison? Presumably Derek's family would take custody, assuming he's not also incarcerated. If both parents are imprisoned. He trailed off, but I understood. My future grandchild could end up in foster care because its parents had been too greedy to wait for a legitimate inheritance. The phone rang. Gerald answered with his usual professional courtesy, but his expression quickly changed to surprise. Eleanor, it's Derek's mother, Patricia Hayes. She wants to meet with you. Patricia Hayes had the kind of polished appearance that screamed old money, perfectly styled gray hair, expensive jewelry, clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She sat in my living room like she was granting me an audience. Eleanor, this situation has gotten completely out of hand. Derek made some poor choices, obviously, but prosecuting him seems rather vindictive. Vindictive. Her son had helped steal $33 million from me, and she thought prosecution was vindictive. Mrs. Hayes, your son planned to steal my entire inheritance and leave me homeless. I'm not sure how that constitutes poor choices. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. Derek was trying to protect Jessica's interests. You have to understand, he's been under enormous pressure financially. His business was struggling, and then Jessica's pregnancy complications required expensive treatment. The same excuses Jessica had used. Apparently, the Hayes family believed that financial pressure justified any crime. What kind of complications? I asked, genuinely concerned despite everything. High-risk pregnancy. She needs specialized care that costs thousands per month. Derek was desperate to secure funding for her treatment. I felt a stab of guilt. My grandchild was at risk, and I hadn't even known. Patricia seemed to sense an opening. Eleanor, our family is prepared to make this right. We'll compensate you for your inconvenience and ensure Derek gets the help he needs. Let's say, $5 million to drop the charges against both of them. $5 million to forgive the theft of $33 million. The math alone was insulting. Mrs. Hayes, your son didn't just steal money from me. He emotionally abused me as part of a calculated plan to destroy my sense of worth and independence. Derek isn't a bad person, Eleanor. He's just someone who made desperate choices under extreme pressure. I looked at this woman, expensively dressed, clearly wealthy, completely convinced that her son's crimes were somehow my fault for not being understanding enough. Mrs. Hayes, let me ask you something. If someone had forged documents to steal your home and thrown you out with $200 and a recommendation for a budget motel, would you consider that a poor choice or a crime? Her composure cracked slightly. That's different. I'm not. I mean, Derek thought you couldn't handle. Couldn't handle what? Living in my own house? Managing my own money? Making my own decisions? Eleanor, you have to admit that senior citizens are often targets for financial scams. Derek was trying to protect the family assets from potential exploitation. The logic was so twisted it was almost impressive. Derek had stolen my inheritance to protect me from people who might steal my inheritance. Your final offer, Mrs. Hayes? She brightened, clearly thinking she'd won. $7 million. Final offer. Derek gets probation, Jessica gets counseling instead of prison time, and everyone moves forward. $7 million to let my daughter and son-in-law walk free after planning to destroy my life. My answer is no. Patricia's mask of politeness finally slipped completely. Eleanor, you're making a serious mistake. Derek has connections in the financial world that could make your life very difficult if you continue this vindictive prosecution. Was she threatening me? Mrs. Hayes, are you suggesting your son might retaliate against me if I don't drop the charges against him? Her face went pale as she realized what she'd just implied. I didn't mean. I was just suggesting that prolonged legal battles can be complicated. I think we're done here. After she left, I called Gerald immediately. She just threatened me. I told him. Derek's mother suggested he had connections that could make my life difficult if I continued the prosecution. Gerald's response was swift and decisive. Eleanor, I'm documenting this conversation and forwarding it to Detective Rodriguez. Threatening a witness is a serious crime. Gerald, what have I gotten myself into? You've gotten yourself into the fight of your life, he said simply. But Eleanor, you're winning. That evening, I sat in Charles's study, my study now, and tried to process everything that had happened. In the span of 3 days, I'd gone from homeless widow to crime victim to millionaire to potential target of additional crimes. But for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not the helpless elderly woman Jessica and Derek had tried to create, but the strong person I'd always been underneath the grief and confusion. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Drop the charges or you'll regret it. I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Detective Rodriguez with a note. I think they're getting desperate. Her response came back immediately. They should be. We have enough evidence to put them away for years. As I got ready for bed in my own house in my own bedroom, I realized something important had changed. I was no longer just reacting to what Jessica and Derek had done to me. I was actively fighting back. And I was just getting started. The FBI raid on Derek's investment firm happened at dawn on a Thursday morning. I watched the news coverage from my kitchen, drinking coffee from my favorite mug while federal agents carried boxes of evidence from the building where my son-in-law had been running his criminal empire. This is Channel 7 News with breaking coverage of a major financial fraud investigation. FBI agents are executing search warrants at Hayes Investment Management, following allegations of a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme affecting dozens of local investors. The reporter continued, but I was focused on the images of Derek being let out in handcuffs. Even in orange jail scrubs, he maintained that arrogant expression I'd learned to hate. Gerald called within minutes of the broadcast ending. Eleanor, they found more than anyone expected. Derek's been running multiple fraud schemes simultaneously. The Ponzi scheme was just the beginning. How much money are we talking about? Over $40 million stolen from investors. Some of them were elderly clients who trusted him with their entire retirement savings.
Elderly client.
People like me, people who'd worked their whole lives and trusted someone to help them maintain their security in retirement. Derek had been destroying lives for years. But there's something else, Gerald continued, his tone growing more serious. When the FBI searched Derek's home office, they found detailed records of your husband's business dealings. Eleanor, I think there may have been a reason Derek specifically targeted your family. A chill ran down my spine. What kind of reason? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can I come over this morning? An hour later, Gerald sat across from me at my kitchen table with a folder that looked ominous even before he opened it. Eleanor, what I'm about to tell you may change how you think about Charles and your marriage. Are you prepared for that possibility? I'd been married to Charles for 41 years. We'd shared everything: hopes, dreams, fears, plans for the future. What could Derek possibly have discovered that I didn't already know? Tell me. Gerald opened the folder and pulled out copies of bank statements, business contracts, and what looked like surveillance photos. Derek's been investigating your husband's architecture firm for over 2 years. He was specifically targeting Charles's business accounts. Why would Derek care about Charles's architecture firm? Because Charles wasn't just an architect, Eleanor. He was laundering money. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. Charles was the most honest man I've ever known. Gerald's expression was sympathetic, but firm. Eleanor, the evidence is overwhelming. For at least 15 years, Charles was using his architecture firm to wash money for organized crime families. Millions of dollars flowed through fake construction projects and consulting contracts. I stared at the documents he spread across my table. Bank transfers for projects that never existed. Payments to shell companies that appeared to have no legitimate business purpose. Invoices for services that were clearly fabricated. This can't be real, I whispered. Charles would never. Eleanor, look at this. Gerald pointed to a series of photographs that made my blood turn to ice. Charles meeting with men I didn't recognize in parking garages. Charles exchanging briefcases with people who definitely didn't look like legitimate business partners. Charles counting large amounts of cash in his office late at night. The photographs were dated. Some from 5 years ago. Some from just months before his death. How long has Derek known about this? Based on these records, Derek discovered Charles's activities about 2 years ago. He's been planning to blackmail your family ever since. Blackmail? Derek hadn't just stumbled into fraud. He'd been systematically planning to destroy us for years. But why didn't he just report Charles to the authorities? Why the elaborate fraud scheme? Gerald looked uncomfortable. Because Derek needed Charles's criminal network intact. He wasn't planning to expose the money laundering. He was planning to take it over. The room started spinning around me. My husband had been a criminal. My son-in-law was a criminal who'd been planning to steal my husband's criminal empire. And I was sitting in the middle of it all, completely oblivious to everything. Eleanor, there's more you need to know. The $33 million Charles left you, most of it came from his illegal activities. I felt like I was drowning. So everything I inherited is dirty money? Not necessarily. The FBI is still investigating. But it appears Charles was also running a legitimate architecture business, alongside his criminal activities. Some of the money is clean. Some of it. After 41 years of marriage, I couldn't tell which parts of our life had been real and which parts had been built on crime. Gerald, what does this mean for me legally? It depends on what the FBI investigation reveals. If they can prove you had no knowledge of Charles's criminal activities, you should be able to keep whatever assets are determined to be legitimate. If they think you were involved, he didn't need to finish that sentence. I could face criminal charges myself. How could I have lived with Charles for 41 years and not known any of this? Gerald's expression softened. Eleanor, you're not the first spouse to be completely unaware of their partner's double life. Criminals often work very hard to compartmentalize their activities and protect their families from knowledge that could implicate them. Or Charles knew that if I found out, I'd leave him. The thought hit me like a revelation. Had Charles kept me in the dark to protect me, or to protect himself? Had our entire marriage been based on lies? My phone rang. Detective Rodriguez. Mrs. Mitchell, we have a problem. Jessica and Derek's lawyer is claiming that you knew about your husband's criminal activities, and that the will was actually forged to hide illegal assets from federal investigation. My heart stopped. What does that mean? It means they're trying to flip the script. Instead of being the criminals, they're claiming to be the victims of your criminal conspiracy with your dead husband. The audacity was breathtaking. Jessica and Derek had stolen my inheritance, thrown me out of my house, and now they were claiming I was the real criminal. Detective Rodriguez, I had no idea about any of Charles's illegal activities until this morning. I believe you, Mrs. Mitchell. But we need to prove it. Can you come to the station this afternoon? We need to go through your knowledge of your husband's business activities in detail. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen feeling like my entire world was collapsing again. Just when I thought I was finally safe, another crisis had emerged to threaten everything I thought I knew about my life. Gerald was watching me with concern. Eleanor, how are you processing all of this? I don't know, I said honestly. Yesterday I thought Charles was the love of my life. Would you like me to recommend a therapist? This kind of revelation can be traumatic. A therapist? At 65, I was going to need professional help to understand my own marriage. Gerald, before I make any decisions about therapy, I need to know something. Were you aware of Charles's criminal activities? His pause told me everything I needed to know. Eleanor, I suspected something wasn't entirely legitimate about some of Charles's business dealings. But I was his estate attorney, not his business attorney. I handled wills and property transfers, not his day-to-day operations. But you suspected. I suspected that Charles had income sources beyond his architecture practice. The amounts didn't always match what I'd expect from a firm his size. Everyone had suspected except me, the devoted wife, the woman who'd spent 4 decades making sure Charles had clean shirts and hot meals, had been the only person completely oblivious to her husband's double life. Why didn't you ask him about it? Gerald looked genuinely uncomfortable. Eleanor, when a client is paying substantial legal fees and their business appears profitable, we generally don't investigate the source of their success unless we're required to do so. He'd taken Charles's money without asking questions, just like I'd lived in Charles's house and spent Charles's money without wondering where it all came from. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a woman in an expensive suit carrying an official-looking briefcase. Eleanor Mitchell? I'm Agent Lisa Parker with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We need to talk. Agent Parker was exactly what I'd expect from a federal investigator: professional, intimidating, and completely immune to charm or deflection. She sat in my living room with a recording device and a legal pad, ready to dissect 41 years of my marriage. Mrs. Mitchell, we're investigating your late husband's business activities. I need to ask you some detailed questions about your knowledge of his income sources and business operations. Agent Parker, I found out about Charles's criminal activities approximately 4 hours ago. Until this morning, I thought he was a legitimate architect. I understand that's your position, Mrs. Mitchell, but I need to verify your claims. Let's start with your husband's work schedule. Did he frequently work late nights or weekends? I thought back to all those evenings when Charles had claimed to be at the office, reviewing blueprints or meeting with clients. Yes, but he was building his practice. Architects often work irregular hours. Did he ever receive large cash payments at your home? Cash payments. I tried to remember, but 41 years of marriage contained thousands of small details. Sometimes clients would pay their final bills in cash, but Charles always deposited everything through the business account. Did you ever see him with large amounts of cash? Define large amounts. More than a few $1,000s at one time. I thought about Charles's habits. He'd always carried a substantial amount of cash, $2,000 or $3,000 in his wallet at any given time. He'd said it was for business expenses and emergency situations. Charles always carried significant cash, but he said it was for business purposes. Agent Parker made notes. Mrs. Mitchell, did your husband ever introduce you to business associates who seemed unusual? What do you mean by unusual? People who didn't seem like typical architecture clients. People who made you uncomfortable. I thought about the dinner parties Charles had hosted over the years. Most of his associates had seemed like normal business people, other architects, contractors, city planning officials. But there had been a few. There were some people who didn't seem to fit the usual pattern, I admitted. Men who wore expensive jewelry and drove flashy cars but didn't seem to know anything about architecture when I tried to make conversation. Can you remember any names? Names. After 41 years the faces blurred together, but a few names stuck out. Vincent Carlucci. He came to dinner several times over the years. Always talked about investments but never about buildings. Agent Parker's pen stopped moving. Vincent Carlucci? You know him. Mrs. Mitchell, Vincent Carlucci is the head of the Carlucci crime family. He's been under federal investigation for money laundering and racketeering for over 20 years. The man who'd sat at my dinner table, complimented my cooking, and brought expensive wine for our anniversary parties was a crime boss. I'd served Sunday dinner to a man who was probably responsible for murders. Agent Parker, I had no idea who these people really were. I'm starting to believe that, Mrs. Mitchell. But I need to verify your financial knowledge. Did you have access to your husband's business accounts? No. Charles handled all the business finances. I managed our household expenses, but the business was completely separate. Did you ever sign business documents or tax returns? I thought carefully. I signed our joint personal tax returns, but Charles always prepared them himself. I never saw the business returns. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to show you some documents. I need you to tell me if you recognize them. Agent Parker pulled out a folder full of bank statements, contracts, and financial records. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing in and out of accounts I'd never seen before. I've never seen any of these documents, I said honestly. What about this signature? She pointed to a line on several contracts where my name had been signed in handwriting that looked similar to mine, but wasn't quite right. That's not my signature. It's close, but Charles always signed my name on Christmas cards and thank you notes. He was very good at mimicking my handwriting. Agent Parker leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Mitchell, based on your responses and our investigation so far, I believe you were genuinely unaware of your husband's criminal activities. However, that doesn't mean you're completely in the clear. What do you mean? It means some of the money you inherited may need to be forfeited as proceeds of criminal activity. We're still determining how much of your husband's wealth was legitimate versus criminal. How much could I lose? Potentially most of it. If we determine that the majority of Charles's assets came from illegal sources, you could be left with whatever property and savings can be proven to come from legitimate business income. After Agent Parker left, I sat in my living room trying to process what my life had become. In the span of 1 week, I discovered that my daughter was a criminal, my son-in-law was a criminal, my husband had been a criminal, and I might lose everything I owned because of crimes I'd known nothing about. But something Agent Parker had said kept nagging at me. Charles had been very good at forging my signature. If he could sign my name convincingly, what else had he been doing without my knowledge? I went to Charles's study and began looking through his personal files more carefully. Hidden behind his legitimate architectural plans, I found a second set of files I'd never seen before. Bank account statements for accounts I didn't know existed. Contracts with companies that sounded legitimate but apparently weren't. Meeting schedules with people whose names I didn't recognize. And then I found something that changed everything again. A life insurance policy in my name. For $2 million. With a beneficiary I'd never heard of. The beneficiary was listed as Vincent Carlucci Family Trust. Charles had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on me and named a crime family as the beneficiary. My hands were shaking as I called Gerald. Eleanor, what did you find? Charles took out a life insurance policy on me. The beneficiary is Vincent Carlucci's family trust. Silence. Then, Eleanor, I think you may be in more danger than we realized. What do you mean? I mean, if Charles owed money to the Carlucci family, that insurance policy might have been intended as collateral. And if they think you know something about Charles's criminal activities. He didn't need to finish the sentence. I was worth more dead than alive to people who had no problem killing to collect debts. Gerald, what do I do? You call Detective Rodriguez immediately. And Eleanor. Yes. Don't stay in that house tonight. I spent that night in a downtown hotel room, clutching my phone and jumping at every sound in the hallway. Detective Rodriguez had taken the insurance policy information seriously enough to assign a protective detail to my house, but she'd been clear about the reality of my situation. Mrs. Mitchell, if the Carlucci family believes you have information about their financial arrangements with your husband, or if they think you might cooperate with our investigation, you could be at risk. Risk. Such a polite word for the possibility that organized criminals might decide I needed to disappear. The hotel phone rang at 6 a.m. Detective Rodriguez's voice was tense. "Eleanor, we have a situation. Someone broke into your house last night." My blood turned to ice. "What did they take?" "That's the strange part. Nothing was taken, but your husband's study was completely torn apart. They were looking for something specific." "Looking for what?" Charles had been dead for months. What could possibly be hidden in his study that criminals would risk a break-in to find? "Detective Rodriguez, what am I supposed to do? I can't live in hotels indefinitely." "We're working on that. But Eleanor, there's something else. Jessica's lawyer has contacted the prosecutor's office. She wants to make a deal." "A deal?" "My daughter wanted to negotiate her way out of the consequences of stealing my inheritance." "What kind of deal?" "She's offering to provide information about her father's criminal activities in exchange for reduced charges on her fraud case." The betrayal was breathtaking. Jessica was willing to destroy her father's memory to save herself from the consequences of her own crimes. What kind of information could she possibly have? Jessica never showed any interest in Charles's business. "That's what we need to find out. Can you come to the station this morning? We'd like you to be present when we interview her." An hour later, I sat in a gray interrogation room watching my daughter across a metal table. Jessica looked terrible. Her usual perfect grooming replaced by the haggard appearance of someone who'd spent a week in jail. But her eyes still held that calculating look I'd learned to recognize. "Mom, I'm glad you're here. We need to work together to get through this." Work together? As if we were partners instead of victim and criminal. Detective Rodriguez sat beside me with a thick folder of documents. "Jessica, you've indicated that you have information about your father's business activities that might be relevant to our investigation. What can you tell us?" Jessica glanced at me, then at her lawyer, then back at the detective. "Daddy wasn't just laundering money. He was skimming from the people he was supposed to be helping." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "Daddy was taking more than his agreed percentage from the money. He was washing for the Carlucci family. He was stealing from organized crime, Mom. That's why he died." The room went completely silent. Even the detective stopped taking notes. "Jessica, are you saying you think your father's death wasn't natural?" "I'm saying that healthy 73-year-old men don't usually drop dead from strokes unless someone wants them to." I stared at my daughter in horror. "You think Charles was murdered?" "I think Daddy got too greedy and the wrong people found out about it." Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. "Jessica, do you have evidence to support this theory?" Jessica's lawyer whispered something in her ear, and she nodded. "I have documents that show Daddy was skimming significant amounts from his money laundering operations. And I have records of phone calls between Daddy and Vincent Carlucci in the weeks before he died." "What kind of phone calls?" "Arguments. Threats." "Daddy was scared, Mom. Really scared. He started talking about disappearing, about liquidating everything and leaving the country." I thought about Charles's behavior in his final weeks. He had seemed more stressed than usual, more secretive about his work. I'd attributed it to business pressures, but what if it had been something much more dangerous? "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" I asked. Jessica's composure finally cracked. "Because I was trying to protect you. If you'd known Daddy was in trouble with the mob, you would have been in danger too. So instead you decided to steal my inheritance and throw me out of my house. I was trying to get you away from anything connected to Daddy's criminal activities before the Carlucci family decided you knew too much." The logic was so twisted I could barely follow it. Jessica claimed she'd committed fraud to protect me from criminals, but she'd done it in the cruelest way possible. Detective Rodriguez was taking detailed notes. "Jessica, where are these documents you mentioned?" "Hidden in Mom's house. Daddy gave them to me for safekeeping right before he died. He said if anything happened to him, I should use them to protect our family. Protection. Charles had given Jessica evidence of his crimes as protection, and she'd used that same evidence to justify stealing from me. Where in the house? Jessica looked at me apologetically. In the wall safe behind your bedroom mirror. Daddy installed it years ago, but he never told Mom about it. A secret safe in my own bedroom. After 41 years of marriage, Charles had been hiding evidence of his crimes literally behind my back. The search warrant was executed that afternoon. I watched from the driveway as FBI agents removed a safe I'd never known existed from the wall of my bedroom. The safe contained exactly what Jessica had promised. Detailed records of Charles's skimming operation, recorded phone calls, and what appeared to be a confession letter addressed to me. Agent Parker handed me a copy of Charles's letter with an expression that suggested she wasn't sure whether to offer sympathy or suspicion. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband's confession explains a lot about his activities. You should read this carefully. I opened the letter with shaking hands. Eleanor, if you're reading this, something has happened to me and Jessica has given you these documents as I instructed. I need you to know that everything I did was to protect our family, but I fear I may have put you in danger instead. For the past 18 years, I've been laundering money for the Carlucci family through my architecture firm. What started as a small favor for a client became a complex criminal operation that generated millions of dollars in illegal income. I justified it by telling myself that I was providing security for our retirement and Jessica's future. But over time, I became greedy. I began taking more than my agreed percentage, skimming funds that belonged to very dangerous people. By the time you read this, they will have discovered my betrayal. I've tried to negotiate a solution, but Vincent Carlucci is not a forgiving man. He's given me an ultimatum. Repay the $2 million I've stolen, or face the consequences. I don't have $2 million in liquid assets without liquidating our entire estate, which would have exposed everything to federal investigation anyway. I've chosen to take my chances with disappearing rather than destroying our family's future. Eleanor, if I'm dead, it wasn't a stroke or heart attack. The life insurance policy I took out with the Carlucci Trust as beneficiary was supposed to buy your safety, but I'm not sure Vincent will honor that agreement once he realizes how much I actually stole from him. Jessica knows about my criminal activities because I told her everything in case something happened to me. I've asked her to use this information to protect you, but I realize now that I may have burdened her with knowledge that could put her in danger too. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I'm sorry for lying to you for 18 years. I'm sorry for putting you in danger. And I'm sorry that your last memory of me will be colored by the knowledge of what I really was. The money I'm leaving you in the will is clean. It came from my legitimate architecture business and investments I made with legally earned income. Jessica's inheritance comes from the illegal activities, which is why I structured the will to only give it to her if she treats you with respect and dignity. I was hoping she would choose family over money. If you're reading this letter, I was wrong about that too. I love you, Eleanor. I've always loved you. Every single day of our marriage. Even the days when I was lying to you about everything else. Charles. I read the letter 3 times before I could fully process what it meant. Charles hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been murdered by criminals he'd been stealing from. Jessica had known about his criminal activities and his death, but instead of protecting me, she'd used that knowledge to justify stealing my inheritance. And the $2 million Charles owed the Carlucci family was still unpaid, which meant they might still consider me responsible for his debts. Agent Parker was watching my face as I processed the implications. Mrs. Mitchell, this changes our investigation significantly. We're now treating your husband's death as a potential homicide. What does that mean for me? It means you're probably still in danger. If the Carlucci family killed your husband over $2 million, they're not going to forget about that debt, just because he's dead. Detective Rodriguez joined us on my front porch looking grim. Eleanor, we found something else in the safe. Recent bank statements showing large cash withdrawals from accounts we didn't know existed. What kind of withdrawals? Charles withdrew nearly $300,000 in cash during the month before his death. We don't know what he did with the money, but it suggests he was either trying to pay off part of his debt or preparing to run. $300,000. Where would Charles have hidden that much cash? And if it was intended to pay the Carlucci family, why hadn't they received it? There's more, Detective Rodriguez continued. We've been monitoring Jessica and Derek's communications from jail. They've been discussing something called the emergency fund that Charles supposedly left behind. An emergency fund. Charles had hidden money somewhere, and Jessica knew about it. What kind of emergency fund? We're not sure, but based on their conversations, it sounds like Charles left cash hidden somewhere as insurance against exactly the situation he found himself in before his death. Agent Parker looked thoughtful. Mrs. Mitchell, is there anywhere Charles might have hidden large amounts of cash? Somewhere only family members would know about. I thought about our 41 years together. Charles had been secretive about his business, but I'd known his personal habits better than anyone. Where would he hide something he wanted to keep safe but accessible? The lake house, I said suddenly. We have a cabin on Lake Morrison that's been in Charles's family for decades. He always said it was his refuge, his place to think when business got complicated. Agent Parker and Detective Rodriguez exchanged looks. Ailey. Not since before Charles died. He'd been going there frequently in his final months, sometimes for entire weekends. He said he was working on architectural plans that required concentration. We need to search that property immediately. 2 hours later, we were standing in the driveway of Charles's family cabin, a rustic building nestled among pine trees on the shore of Lake Morrison. Charles had inherited the property from his father, and had always treated it as his personal sanctuary. The FBI search team found Charles's emergency fund within 30 minutes. Hidden in a false bottom of an old steamer trunk in the cabin's bedroom, they discovered $450,000 in cash, along with false identification documents and what appeared to be a detailed plan for disappearing permanently. Mrs. Mitchell, Agent Parker said, holding up a passport with Charles's photo but a different name. Your husband was definitely planning to run. This passport is professionally forged, and these bank account numbers are for offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I stared at the evidence of Charles's escape plan. In his final weeks, while I'd been worrying about his health and stress levels, he'd been planning to fake his death and disappear to the Caribbean with nearly $500,000 in stolen money. Why didn't he go through with it? Based on the timeline, I think Vincent Carlucci moved faster than Charles expected. The passport is dated just 2 days before your husband's death. Charles had been killed just 48 hours before he could have escaped forever. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Detective Rodriguez was examining the other documents in the trunk. Eleanor, there's something else here. A video recording addressed to you. She handed me a small digital recorder with Charles's handwriting on a label. For Eleanor, to be played only if I don't return from this meeting. My hands were shaking as I pressed play. Charles's face appeared on the small screen. And for a moment, seeing him alive again took my breath away. But this wasn't the Charles I'd known for 41 years. This man looked terrified, defeated, desperate. Eleanor, if you're watching this, Vincent Carlucci has probably killed me. I'm about to meet with him to try to negotiate a solution to my debt problem. But I don't think he's planning to let me walk away from this meeting. I want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. When I first started washing money for the Carlucci family, it seemed like easy money, a few $1,000s here and there for services that didn't seem to hurt anyone. But it became an addiction. The money, the danger, the feeling of being powerful and connected to something bigger than my architecture practice. By the time I realized how deep I was in, I couldn't get out without destroying everything we'd built together. So I kept going, and I kept stealing more, telling myself I was building security for our future. Eleanor, I've stolen over $2 million from people who kill for much less. I've put you in danger, and I've put Jessica in danger, and there's no way to fix it except to disappear completely. If I survive this meeting, I'm going to take the money in this trunk and disappear forever. I'll use the forged passport and offshore accounts to start over somewhere far away. You'll never see me again, but you'll be safe. If I don't survive, I hope this money will be enough to buy your safety from Vincent. Give him everything in this trunk and tell him the debt is paid. Maybe he'll honor our agreement and leave you alone. Eleanor, I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life. Every criminal act I committed was an attempt to give you a better future, but I realize now that I was just poisoning everything we'd built together. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. If there's an afterlife, I'll spend eternity trying to make this up to you. The recording ended, and I was left staring at a black screen in a cabin full of evidence of my husband's double life. Agent Parker gently took the recorder from my hands. Mrs. Mitchell, this recording is crucial evidence in a murder investigation. It essentially confirms that your husband expected to be killed at his final meeting with Vincent Carlucci. I looked around the cabin that had been Charles's secret refuge, his criminal headquarters, his planned escape route. 41 years of marriage, and I'd never known any of it was real. Agent Parker, what happens now? Now we arrest Vincent Carlucci for your husband's murder. And we use this money as evidence to build a case against the entire Carlucci organization. What about me? Am I still in danger? Agent Parker was quiet for a moment, considering. Mrs. Mitchell, Vincent Carlucci killed your husband over $2 million. We've now recovered less than half that amount. He's probably still going to consider you responsible for the outstanding debt. The outstanding debt. I was going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder because my dead husband had stolen from the mob. As we drove back toward town, Detective Rodriguez's radio crackled with urgent communication from headquarters. Rodriguez, we have a situation. Vincent Carlucci's been arrested, but we intercepted communications suggesting an immediate threat against Eleanor Mitchell. You need to get her to a safe location immediately. My phone rang before Detective Rodriguez could respond. Unknown number. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Vincent Carlucci. I think it's time we had a conversation. Don't hang up. Vincent Carlucci's voice was calm, almost polite. I'm calling to arrange a meeting. Your husband owed me money, and I'd like to discuss how you plan to resolve his debt. Detective Rodriguez was frantically signaling FBI agents while staying close enough to hear both sides of the conversation. Mr. Carlucci, I don't owe you anything. Whatever arrangement you had with Charles died with him. His laugh was soft and genuinely amused. Mrs. Mitchell, that's not how business works in my world. Charles stole from me. The debt transfers to his estate. You inherited his assets, so you inherited his obligations. I inherited his legitimate assets. I'm not responsible for money he stole from criminal activities. Eleanor, may I call you Eleanor? You seem to misunderstand the situation. I don't care about legal definitions of inheritance. I care about the $2 million your husband took from my organization, plus interest and penalties for his betrayal. Interest and penalties. He was treating Charles's theft like a bank loan. How much are we talking about? $3 million. To be paid within 72 hours, or I'll consider our agreement void and handle this situation according to traditional methods. Traditional methods? He was threatening to kill me over money my dead husband had stolen. Agent Parker had arrived and was setting up recording equipment while Detective Rodriguez kept me talking. What if I don't have $3 million? Eleanor, your husband's estate is worth over $30 million. You have the money. The question is whether you have the wisdom to pay it. And if I pay, you'll leave me alone? I'll consider Charles's debt settled and our business concluded. Agent Parker was writing notes and showing them to me. Keep him talking. We're tracing the call. Mr. Carlucci, how do I know you'll honor that agreement? How do I know you won't just keep demanding more money? Because I'm a businessman, Eleanor, not a terrorist. I don't make money by harassing widows indefinitely. I make money by ensuring that people who owe me money pay their debts promptly and completely. His tone was so reasonable, so professional. It was almost easy to forget that he was a murderer discussing my husband's assassination like a business transaction. I need time to arrange that kind of money. You have 72 hours. I'll call you with instructions for the payment transfer. Wait, I said, making a decision that probably should have terrified me more than it did. I want to meet with you in person. Silence. Then. That's unusual, Eleanor. Most people prefer to handle these transactions from a distance. I'm not most people. If I'm paying $3 million to settle my dead husband's debt, I want to look you in the eye and make sure we both understand the terms of our agreement." Agent Parker was shaking her head frantically, but I'd made up my mind. After months of being victimized, manipulated, and threatened, I was tired of being afraid. "Very well. Tomorrow evening at 7 p.m., there's a restaurant called Giuliano's on the waterfront. I'll have a table reserved under my name. I'll be there. Eleanor, don't bring any federal agents. I'll know if you do, and it will complicate our negotiations unnecessarily." After he hung up, Agent Parker looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Mrs. Mitchell, meeting with Vincent Carlucci is incredibly dangerous. He's killed people for much smaller reasons than what you're discussing." "Agent Parker, I've spent the last 3 months discovering that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. My husband was a criminal, my daughter is a criminal, my son-in-law is a criminal, and now I'm being threatened by the mob over debts I didn't know existed. I'm 65 years old and I'm tired of being afraid." Detective Rodriguez looked skeptical. "Eleanor, what do you hope to accomplish by meeting with him?" "I want to understand who Charles really was and what he was involved in. I want to look Vincent Carlucci in the eye and hear him admit that he murdered my husband. And I want to make it clear that I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being terrorized over money I never saw." Agent Parker was pacing the room. "Mrs. Mitchell, if you insist on this meeting, we'll need to wire you for sound and have surveillance teams in place." "No wires. Carlucci said he'd know if I brought federal agents, and I believe him. If we're going to do this, we do it on his terms." "Eleanor, that's suicide." Maybe it was. But after months of feeling powerless and victimized, the thought of confronting my tormentor face-to-face felt like the first brave thing I'd done since Charles died. "Agent Parker, I'm going to that meeting with or without FBI support. The question is whether you want to be in position to arrest him afterward or whether you want to read about it in the newspapers." 24 hours later, I sat at a corner table in Giuliano's restaurant, wearing my best dress and waiting to have dinner with the man who'd murdered my husband. The restaurant was elegant and crowded, full of couples enjoying romantic dinners and business associates conducting deals over expensive wine. Vincent Carlucci arrived exactly at 7 p.m., and he was nothing like what I'd expected. Instead of the stereotypical mob boss from movies, he looked like a successful businessman, well-dressed, well-groomed, with the kind of quiet confidence that suggested he was used to people taking him seriously. He slid into the seat across from me with the ease of someone who'd never doubted he belonged wherever he chose to sit. "Eleanor, thank you for coming. You look lovely." His politeness was more unsettling than outright threats would have been. "Mr. Carlucci. Please call me Vincent. We're about to conclude a significant business transaction. We should be comfortable with each other." He ordered wine without asking my preference, chatted casually about the restaurant's reputation, and commented on the weather like we were old friends catching up. If I hadn't known he was a murderer, he would have seemed like a charming dinner companion. "Eleanor, I have to say I'm impressed that you wanted to handle this negotiation personally. Most people prefer to work through intermediaries." "I'm not most people, Vincent." "No, you're certainly not." He raised his wine glass in what seemed like a toast. "To Charles." He was a complicated man, but I respected his intelligence. "Enough to kill him?" Vincent set down his glass and studied my face carefully. "Eleanor, your husband made choices that put him in an impossible situation. I didn't kill him because I was angry or vindictive. I killed him because he'd become a liability to my organization." The casual admission hit me like a physical blow. He just confessed to murder like he was discussing the weather. "Charles stole $2 million from you. Charles stole over $2 million, betrayed my trust, and then tried to negotiate as if he had leverage in the situation. Men who steal from me and then act like equals don't live very long. So you had him killed." "I had him removed as a threat to my business interests." "Eleanor, your husband wasn't an innocent man who made one mistake. He was a criminal who got careless and thought he was smarter than people who'd been in this business for decades." Vincent signaled the waiter for another bottle of wine. "Charles thought he could skim money gradually and I'd never notice. What he didn't understand is that I notice everything that happens with my money." "How long did you know he was stealing?" "About 6 months before I confronted him. I wanted to see how much he'd take, and whether he'd have the intelligence to stop before it became a problem that required permanent solutions. But he didn't stop. No. He got greedier. By the end, he was taking 15% of every transaction instead of his agreed-upon 3%. That's not a mistake, Eleanor. That's deliberate theft on a massive scale. I thought about Charles in his final weeks, stressed, secretive, planning his escape. Why didn't you just demand the money back? Why did it have to end in murder? Vincent's expression hardened slightly. Because Charles thought he was smarter than me. When I confronted him about the theft, he denied it. When I showed him proof, he tried to negotiate like we were equals. And when I explained the consequences of stealing from my organization, he threatened to expose our entire operation to federal investigators. So you killed him to protect yourself. I killed him to protect my business and the dozens of people who depend on that business for their livelihood. Eleanor, your husband wasn't just stealing money. He was threatening to destroy an organization that employs hundreds of people and supports their families. His justification was chilling in its rationality. In Vincent's world, murdering Charles had been a business decision designed to protect other people's interests. What about the life insurance policy? The one where your family trust was the beneficiary. Vincent smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. That was Charles's idea. He suggested it as collateral for his debt when I first confronted him about the theft. He thought it would buy him time to repay what he'd stolen. $2 million for my life. $2 million for his debt. Your life was just the mechanism for collecting it. The casual way he discussed my potential murder made my blood run cold. But I forced myself to stay focused on the conversation. Vincent, if Charles is dead and you have the insurance money, why do you still think I owe you anything? His laugh was genuine and amused. Eleanor, the insurance company hasn't paid that claim yet. They're investigating your husband's death as a potential homicide. Until that money comes through, you're still responsible for his debt. What if the insurance company never pays? What if they determine the policy was fraudulent? Then you'll owe me $3 million for the rest of your life. The waiter approached with our entrees, and Vincent chatted pleasantly about the food while I tried to process the surreal nature of discussing my potential murder over dinner in a crowded restaurant. Vincent, let me ask you something directly. If I pay you the $3 million, will you leave me alone permanently? Eleanor, I'm a businessman. Once our transaction is complete, I have no reason to maintain contact with you. What about Jessica? What about my grandchildren? His fork paused halfway to his mouth. What about them? If something happens to me, will you consider them responsible for any remaining debts? Vincent set down his fork and studied my face carefully. Eleanor, are you negotiating for your daughter's safety as well as your own? I thought about Jessica sitting in federal prison, pregnant and facing years of incarceration because of her own crimes. Despite everything she'd done to me, she was still my daughter. Yes. Even though she stole your inheritance and threw you out of your own house? Even though. Vincent was quiet for several minutes, apparently considering my request. Eleanor, I respect family loyalty, but your daughter made her own choices. She committed crimes against you, and she's facing the consequences of those choices through the legal system. But she's not involved in Charles's debt to you. No, she's not. And as long as she stays uninvolved, she'll have no problems with my organization. It was the closest thing to a guarantee I was likely to get. Vincent, I want to make you an offer. He raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. I'll pay you $2 million, the original amount Charles stole, in exchange for a written agreement that settles all debts and obligations related to Charles's criminal activities. No interest, no penalties, no future claims against me or my family. Eleanor, I told you the current amount is $3 million. And I'm telling you that I'm willing to pay $2 million to end this situation permanently. Take it or leave it. Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying me with what seemed like genuine respect. You realize you're negotiating with someone who could have you killed for refusing my terms? Yes. But you realize you're negotiating with someone who has nothing left to lose. I've lost my husband, my daughter, my sense of security, and my faith in everything I thought I knew about my life. The only thing I have left is my dignity, and I'm not giving that up for anyone." His smile was slow and admiring. "Eleanor, your husband never had half your courage. Charles was brilliant with numbers and architecture, but he was a coward when it came to facing consequences." "Is that a yes to my offer?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, then signaled the waiter for the check. $2 million, delivered in cash within 48 hours. "In exchange, I'll provide you with a written agreement stating that all debts and obligations related to Charles Mitchell's activities with my organization are settled permanently." "And you'll leave my family alone?" "As long as they don't interfere with my business operations, they'll have no contact with my organization." We shook hands across the table, like we just concluded a normal business transaction, instead of negotiating the terms of my survival. As Vincent prepared to leave, he paused at the table. "Eleanor, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you hate Charles for what he did to you?" The question caught me off guard. Did I hate my husband for lying to me, for putting me in danger, for building our entire life on criminal activities I'd known nothing about? "I hate what he did," I said finally. "I hate the lies, the danger, the betrayal. But I don't hate Charles. He was a weak man who made terrible choices, but he was also the man who loved me for 41 years. Vincent nodded approvingly. "That's more forgiveness than he deserved. Charles was lucky to have you, Eleanor. He just wasn't smart enough to realize it." After Vincent left, I sat. I'd just negotiated my own survival with a murderer, and somehow I'd managed to get better terms than he'd initially offered. But more importantly, I'd discovered something about myself that I hadn't known was there. Under all the grief and fear and confusion of the past few months, there was a core of strength that even organized crime couldn't break. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Parker. "Are you safe? What happened?" I typed back. "Meeting concluded successfully. I'll pay him $2 million tomorrow and this will be over." Her response came immediately. "Eleanor, please don't do anything without consulting us first." But I'd already made my decision. The FBI wanted to use me as bait to build a case against Vincent Carlucci's organization. I just wanted to survive this nightmare and rebuild what was left of my life. $2 million to buy my freedom from the consequences of my dead husband's crime seemed like a reasonable price to pay. The question was whether Vincent would actually honor our agreement, or whether paying him would just make me a more attractive target for future extortion. I guess I was about to find out. The bank manager looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I requested $2 million in cash. "Mrs. Mitchell, I have to advise you that withdrawing this amount of money in cash is highly irregular and potentially dangerous. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer a certified check or wire transfer?" "I'm sure." "May I ask what the money is for?" I looked at him across his mahogany desk, this earnest young man who probably made $50,000 a year, and thought that was good money. How could I explain that I was paying ransom to a murderer to settle debts incurred by my criminal husband's theft from organized crime? "It's a personal matter." It took 4 hours to arrange the cash withdrawal. Federal banking regulations required reporting large cash transactions, which meant Agent Parker knew about my payment to Vincent before I'd even left the bank. She called my cell phone before I'd driven 3 blocks. "Eleanor, what are you doing? I'm ending this nightmare once and for all. You're interfering with a federal investigation. We've been building a case against Vincent Carlucci for months. Your cooperation could help us put him away for life." "Agent Parker, I don't want to put Vincent away for life. I want him to leave me alone, so I can figure out what's left of my existence." "Eleanor, paying extortion money to criminals just encourages them to demand more. You're setting a dangerous precedent. I'm buying my freedom from a situation I never asked to be part of. We can't protect you if you go through with this payment." I thought about that as I drove toward the meeting location Vincent had specified. A parking garage downtown where he promised the transaction would be quick and professional. The FBI couldn't protect me anyway. They hadn't protected Charles from being murdered. They couldn't protect me from Jessica's fraud. They couldn't protect me from the emotional devastation of discovering that my entire marriage had been built on lies. The only person who could protect me was me. Vincent was waiting in the parking garage exactly as promised. accompanied by two men who looked like they'd stepped out of a movie about professional criminals. They were polite, efficient, and utterly terrifying in their calm competence. "Eleanor, I appreciate your punctuality." He examined the money briefly, $2 million in cash packed into a large duffel bag, then handed me a folded document. As promised, a written agreement stating that all debts and obligations related to Charles Mitchell's activities with the Carlucci organization are settled permanently. I read the document carefully. It was surprisingly detailed and legally precise, covering not just Charles's original debt, but any potential future claims against me or my family. "Vincent, how do I know this agreement will be honored if something happens to you?" "Because my organization has a reputation to maintain. We honor our contracts, Eleanor. It's how we've stayed in business for 60 years. His associates loaded the money into their car with the efficiency of people who'd handled many similar transactions. "Eleanor, can I give you some advice?" "I suppose. Stay out of criminal enterprises. You have too much integrity for this kind of work." He said it like he was giving career advice instead of acknowledging that I just paid him $2 million to avoid being murdered. "Vincent, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret killing Charles?" He considered the question seriously. "I regret that Charles made choices that required his death. He was intelligent and useful when he followed our agreements, but I don't regret protecting my organization from people who threaten its stability, even if it meant destroying a family." "Eleanor, Charles destroyed his family when he chose to become a criminal. I just dealt with the consequences of his choices." As they prepared to leave, Vincent paused at his car window. "Eleanor, you should know that Charles talked about you constantly. Even when he was begging for his life, he was more worried about your safety than his own survival. Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to help you understand that whatever else Charles was, his love for you was genuine." After they drove away, I sat alone in the parking garage with a signed agreement that officially ended my connection to my husband's criminal past. $2 million to buy my freedom from a nightmare I'd never chosen to enter. My phone rang. "Jessica." "Mom, I heard about your meeting with Vincent Carlucci. Are you insane?" News traveled fast in criminal circles, apparently. "Jessica, I'm handling the situation." "You paid him $2 million? Mom, that money belonged to our family." "Our family?" Jessica was still thinking like the money was ours to spend, even from federal prison. "Jessica, that money bought our safety from people who killed your father. I'd say it was money well spent." "What about my legal fees? What about Derek's defense costs? What about the baby?" I thought about my daughter, pregnant and facing years in prison because she'd been too greedy to wait for a legitimate inheritance. "Jessica, your legal problems are the consequence of your criminal choices. I'm not funding your defense of crimes you committed against me." "Mom, please. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your daughter." "Yes, you are. And when you get out of prison, if you've learned something about the consequences of hurting people you're supposed to love, we can discuss rebuilding our relationship." "What if the baby comes while I'm in prison? What if I need medical care I can't afford?" For the first time in our conversation, Jessica sounded genuinely frightened rather than calculating. "Jessica, I'll make sure the baby has everything it needs, but I won't fund legal strategies designed to help you escape responsibility for your crimes." "That's not fair. Derek manipulated me into believing his version of Daddy's will. I was a victim too." Jessica was still trying to rewrite history, still trying to cast herself as the victim of Derek's manipulation rather than the willing participant in elder abuse. "Jessica, Derek didn't force you to call me worthless and tell me to find somewhere to die. Those were your words, expressing your genuine feelings about my value to your life." I was angry and scared about money. People say things they don't mean when they're under pressure. And people reveal their true character when they're under pressure. You revealed yours, Jessica. Now you're facing the consequences. After hanging up, I drove home to my house, my legitimately owned house, and sat in Charles's study trying to figure out what came next. I had approximately $28 million left after paying Vincent and covering legal expenses. I owned my house free and clear. I had no debts, no criminal obligations, and no immediate threats to my safety. For the first time in months, I was genuinely free to decide what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. The next morning brought a visit from Agent Parker, who looked distinctly unhappy about my transaction with Vincent Carlucci. Eleanor, we could have arrested him during that money exchange. Your payment just allowed a major criminal to escape justice. Agent Parker, Vincent Carlucci has been evading justice for decades. My $2 million wasn't going to be the thing that finally brought him down. It could have been part of building a larger case against his organization. I thought about all the people whose lives had been destroyed by the criminal activities I'd been unwillingly connected to. Charles, dead because of his greed and betrayal. Jessica, facing years in prison because of her greed and cruelty. Derek, looking at decades in federal prison because of his criminal career. Me, spending months in fear and confusion because of crimes I'd known nothing about. Agent Parker, I don't want to be part of building cases against criminal organizations. I want to be left alone to rebuild my life. Eleanor, you have information that could help us prosecute multiple criminal enterprises. I have information about my dead husband's criminal activities. I've given you everything I found in his papers. Beyond that, I'm done being a federal witness. Agent Parker left looking frustrated, but I felt lighter than I had in months. I'd paid my husband's debts, negotiated my family's safety, and officially ended my connection to his criminal past. The only question remaining was what kind of person I wanted to be with the rest of my life. That afternoon, I drove to the federal prison where Jessica was being held. She looked terrible. Pregnancy combined with incarceration had taken a toll on her usual polished appearance. But her eyes still held that calculating look I'd learned to recognize. Mom, I can't believe you came. I wanted to see how you were doing. I'm doing terribly. This place is awful. The food is horrible. And I'm scared about having the baby in prison. She was trying to evoke sympathy, trying to manipulate me into feeling guilty about her situation. Jessica, what do you want from me? I want my mother back. I want the woman who raised me and loved me unconditionally. That woman was naive enough to believe that her love could overcome her daughter's selfishness. I'm not that woman anymore. Jessica started crying. Not the pretty tears she'd used for manipulation since childhood, but genuine sobs of grief and despair. Mom, I know I hurt you. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I'm still your daughter. And this baby is still your grandchild. Yes, Jessica. You're still my daughter. But being my daughter doesn't mean I have to fund your legal defense or pretend that your crimes weren't serious. What about the baby? You're going to let your grandchild grow up without knowing their grandmother. I thought about the child Jessica was carrying, innocent of its parents' crimes but destined to grow up with the consequences of their choices. Jessica, when you get out of prison, we can discuss your future relationship with your child and with me. But that discussion will depend on whether you've learned anything about the consequences of hurting people you're supposed to love. How long will that be? Your lawyer says you're looking at 3 to 4 years if you plead guilty to the federal charges. Jessica's composure finally broke completely. 3 to 4 years. My baby will be walking and talking before I hold them. Yes. That's the consequence of committing felonies against your own mother. Mom, please. I'll do anything to make this right. I looked at my daughter, pregnant, imprisoned, finally beginning to understand the real cost of her choices. Jessica, the time to make this right was when you decided to forge legal documents and steal my inheritance. The time to make this right was when you told me I was worthless and should find somewhere to die. You can't undo those choices with apologies now. So you're just going to abandon me? I'm going to let you face the consequences of your actions, just like I had to face the consequences of your father's actions. Maybe when you get out, you'll be someone worth rebuilding a relationship with. As I prepared to leave, Jessica called out one last desperate plea. Mom, what should I tell the baby about why Grandma won't visit? I turned back to look at her one final time. Tell the baby that Grandma loved them enough to make sure their mother learned the difference between right and wrong. 6 months later, I received a call from Jessica's lawyer. She'd given birth to a healthy baby girl and had named her Eleanor after me. Jessica was asking if I wanted to visit my granddaughter. I thought about it for 3 days before making my decision. I drove to the prison one more time, But this time I was there to see my granddaughter, not my daughter. The baby was beautiful dark hair like Charles, my eyes, and Jessica's stubborn chin. She was perfect and innocent and completely unaware that her mother was in prison for elder abuse. "Mom, thank you for coming," Jessica said, holding the baby carefully. "I didn't come to see you, Jessica. I came to meet Eleanor." "She's beautiful, isn't she?" "Yes, she is." Jessica looked different, older, more tired, but also somehow softer than she'd been before prison. "Mom, I've had a lot of time to think about what I did to you. I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough, but I need you to know that I understand how wrong I was." "Do you understand, Jessica? Or do you just understand that you're facing consequences you don't like?" "I understand that I destroyed our family because I was greedy and selfish. I understand that I hurt the person who loved me most in the world. And I understand that I may never be able to earn your forgiveness." For the first time since this nightmare began, Jessica sounded like she might actually understand the magnitude of what she'd done. "Jessica, forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something I might choose to give you if I believe you've genuinely changed. But that will take years to determine, not months." "I know. Mom, will you? Will you be part of Eleanor's life while I can't?" I looked at the baby, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, and made a decision that would define the rest of my life. Yes, Eleanor deserves to know her grandmother. But understand that my relationship with her doesn't automatically repair my relationship with you. "I understand. And Jessica?" "Yes. If you ever use this child to manipulate me or try to hurt me again, you'll discover that the woman you threw away last year is gone forever. The woman who replaced her is not someone you want to cross." Jessica nodded, holding her daughter a little closer. 3 years later, Jessica was released from federal prison. She was 31, had served her complete sentence, and was starting over with no money, no house, and no job prospects. I was waiting for her outside the prison gates. "Hello, Jessica." "Mom. You came." "I came to talk about Eleanor. About your future with her." We drove to a coffee shop where Jessica looked around nervously, still adjusting to being free. "Mom, I know you don't owe me anything, but I want you to know that I've spent every day of the last 3 years thinking about what I did to you." "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That I was the worst kind of person. Someone who hurt the people who loved me most because I thought I could get away with it." Jessica had lost weight in prison, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But there was also something different in her expression. Humility, maybe, or just exhaustion from 3 years of facing consequences. "Jessica, I've been taking care of Eleanor while you were in prison. She's brilliant, loving, and strong-willed. She knows you're her mother, but she calls me Mama." "I understand. Do you? Because I'm not giving her back to you just because you served your sentence. If you want to be part of her life, you'll need to prove that you're someone worth trusting with a child's well-being." "How do I do that?" I slid an envelope across the table. "You start by rebuilding your life the right way. There's enough money in there to get you an apartment and cover expenses for 6 months while you find a job. After that, you're on your own financially." Jessica opened the envelope and stared at the check for $50,000. "Mom, why are you helping me?" "I'm not helping you, Jessica. I'm helping Eleanor. She deserves a mother who's capable of providing stability and love. If you can become that person, she can know you. If you can't, she's better off without you." Over the next 2 years, I watched Jessica rebuild her life from nothing. She found a job, rented a small apartment, and slowly began earning supervised visits with Eleanor. She attended parenting classes, went to counseling, and worked with a probation officer who specialized in financial crimes. Most importantly, she never once asked me for additional money or tried to use Eleanor to manipulate me into supporting her. The woman who emerged from that process wasn't the selfish, entitled person who'd thrown me away 4 years earlier. She was someone I could respect, even if forgiveness remained complicated. Today, Eleanor is 5 years old. She spends weekends with Jessica and weekdays with me. She knows that her family has a complicated history, but she also knows that she's loved by everyone in her life. Jessica and I will never have the relationship we had before Charles died. Too much damage was done. Too many cruel words were spoken. Too much trust was betrayed. But we've built something new. A careful, respectful arrangement centered on our shared love for Eleanor. I kept $31 million after paying Vincent Carlucci and covering all legal expenses. I've used that money to create the Eleanor Mitchell Foundation for Elder Protection, which funds legal aid for seniors facing family financial abuse. Every month, I receive letters from older people whose adult children have stolen their homes, their savings, their dignity. I help them find lawyers, navigate the legal system, and rebuild their lives after betrayal by the people they trusted most. Charles has been dead for 5 years now. I've learned to think of our 41 years together as partially real and partially fiction. The love was real. The laughter was real. The dreams we shared were real. The criminal activities, the lies, the danger he put me in, those were real too. I've made peace with the complexity of loving someone who was both genuine and completely deceptive. Charles was my husband and my great love. He was also a criminal who nearly got me killed. Both things can be true at the same time. Vincent Carlucci was arrested 2 years ago on unrelated racketeering charges. He's serving 25 years in federal prison, but he honored our agreement. I've had no contact with his organization since our transaction in the parking garage. Derek received 15 years for his Ponzi scheme, and an additional 5 years for his role in Jessica's fraud case. His family lost their house, their savings, and their social standing. His mother, Patricia, sends me a Christmas card every year apologizing for her son's crimes. I don't respond to her cards, but I don't throw them away either. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming the person you're in. When Jessica told me to find somewhere to die because I was worthless, she thought she was speaking to a helpless elderly woman with no options and no power. She was wrong about that, just like she was wrong about everything else. I didn't find somewhere to die. I found somewhere to live. And the life I built from the ashes of her betrayal is richer, stronger, and more meaningful than anything I could have imagined when this nightmare began. If you're watching this and you're facing family betrayal, financial abuse, or any situation where people you trusted are trying to destroy you, remember this. You're stronger than you think you are, smarter than they believe you are, and more capable of fighting back than anyone expects. Don't let anyone convince you that you're worthless. Don't let anyone throw you away. Fight back. Survive. Build something better from whatever pieces they leave behind. Because honey, sometimes the person they underestimate becomes the person holding all the power. And that's exactly what they deserve. Don't forget to subscribe and tell me in the comments. Have you ever had family members try to take advantage of you financially? How did you handle it? Your story might help someone else going through the same nightmare.